think why these references are so important? Yes? Mm-hmm.
Uh, because we are just continuing or extending the work which has already been done, or we are taking an idea and probably extending something out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an extension.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Plus,
even it tells us about the base standard. Basically, what is the datum which we are following?
Mm-hmm.
Like which reference, which journal it belongs to.
You are not actually using any other work, then also, emphasis on references still you will be finding, and referencing still would be relevant. So why? Because
To avoid
references,
plagiarism?
to avoid plagiarism, of course, if you are actually using ideas as a kind of defense, right? So, people who have done similar researches, they also could have arrived at such an understanding of the thing, right? So there is actually similarity of opinion, ideas, or findings. So references are important because they add value to your argument. So they are very important. And research paper, the same structure actually goes everywhere, right? Now, if we talk about types of academic writings, right? So, excuse me. Hmm. So, what are the 4 types of academic writings? Anyone? So, we have descriptive academic writings, we have analytical after that we have critical writings. Now, before I embark upon this journey, why I have taken up a discussion of these types, I should clarify, because somehow we need to understand the approach which we are adopting with whatever we intend to do. So whether we intend to do a descriptive essay or we intend to do an analytic persuasive writing. So if there is clarity in our approach, then it would make the writing very easy, comprehensible, and good, right? So, but then these are not watertight compartments, right? So the moment I say tight compartments, what I mean, they're not watertight compartments. I mean that the boundaries actually melt and merge, and at times you'll find that a piece is both persuasive. So these are not watertight compartments, and all these qualities can actually coexist. They can coexist also in a piece. But still, if you are clear on what is the intention behind what you are doing, then it would actually ease out the process. So descriptive writing is writing which simply provides you with the information or facts. Normally, whenever you are actually doing a report or you're summarizing something, you're trying to define something, then the piece actually would be an example of descriptive writing. So reports, results of experiments, and articles, they are all pieces of. The moment we say analytical, what does it mean? That it has got something to do with what? With analytical writings deal with what? Reasoning is in what? They are scientific in nature, right? Hmm? Yes. So analytical organizing the facts for to reorganize the facts and information in groups, parts, and categories. And the moment you actually are how do you know whether it is analytical writing or not? Then when you are doing analytical something else, or you are examining an idea or something. Now, majority of the scientific pieces, they are at the same time descriptive and analytical, right? Say persuasive, it means that you actually want to persuade your reader to believe in your point or your argument. Now, there is a difference between, persuade is that you actually put forth a perspective and your emphasis is on putting up such arguments that the readers actually agree with your point of view. And in that effort, you actually read about the point of view of others also, and you actually show by comparison how the point which you are putting is as more accountable and should be taken to be good enough or a better one, right? So persuasive writings are writings where our point of view is there and information is reorganized to prove our point of view, right? And majority of the claims which we made, they are supplemented by evidence, right? Now arguments, recommendations, interpretations of findings, and evaluation of the works of others, all this can be done in the process of you writing persuasive pieces. And whenever you find that you are arguing about something, you're evaluating something, you're taking a stand on something, then the kind of writing you're doing is persuasive writing. Then the last type of writing which we indulge more often is critical writing. So every research paper you do actually is critical in nature. So it's research writing. Somehow research writing is synonymous with critical writing. So normally it includes, research papers, journal articles, and literature reviews in it also. Now, when you're doing critical writing, at times what you do, you analyze or identify the strength or weakness of an existing research. So sometimes what happens, a research is published, right? And then people sit and do critical papers on it. So what they are doing, they are analyzing it on the basis of their findings and their claims. They try to test and they try to prove how they have understood the perspective and whether they actually agree or disagree with, or they have some doubts about it. Then normally critique, debate, evaluate, disagree, such terms are associated with every endeavor which is critical in nature, right? Now, when you are writing an academic piece, then conveying the argument, it becomes very important, and it should get a lot of notice. So once you have the idea ready with you, you have brainstormed and you already are clear on what is it that you wish to talk about, then focus should go on how to make clear. And academic argument is evidence-based defense of a complex issue. So because the issue is complex, so to make it explanation also goes into it. So it involves proposing a claim. So you're doing research papers, then you actually follow this process. So you propose a claim, on the you form a hypothesis, and then you go on the discussion part and you explain. So you offer rational reasons and you give the readers with relevant evidence to prove the hypothesis which you have formed. Now, normally academic writing is either balanced or persuasive in nature, right? Yes. So the more should keep in mind, like for example, whether you could clearly define, you have checklist. This is a kind of checklist which actually helps you see whether you're conveying the argument with clarity or not. Then whether there are reasons sufficient is built on reliable evidence or not. So evidence not. So that also you have to check. Then you ensuring a coherent connection between the reasons for supporting the claim. So the reason should be why counter arguments also becomes very necessary when you actually are So this is all I actually wanted to talk about as far as now, before we actually go to the next piece, we'll take a short break as I had declared earlier. And in this short break, I want you all, because majority of you are from the sciences, right? And even if you're not from sciences, this is a question which can be considered. So I have a question in front of you all. So what is the question? Can creative writing be of us to the people of science? What do you think? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So can you come up with any suggestions how? Shaji sir says yes, Jyoti madam says yes, Jinsa yes, Shirley yes, Raman yes. Okay, so all of you are saying yes, but then can you actually figure out, think, how are you going to understand something? Can we do it actually? I am from humanities, right? So, and I am from literature. So my domain is in the creative writing only. But you people are from the world of science. So do you put creative writing to use? And if you have never used it before, can you think of yes?
Madam,
Think about
impact on
it.
society, madam, like severe impact of environmental issues on society is a very critical factor nowadays, which we are facing.
Mhm.
And I feel creative writing can be a meaningful way.
Okay, yes, you're right there. But can we, actually use creative writing to deliver the information of sciences to the students also? So, suppose there is a concept. Can you use creative writing to explain that concept to the students also? Can it be done?
Definitely, madam, it can be done, yeah.
Okay, how?
Which are really meaningful, because diagrams and pictures, they are having a long lasting impact on the minds of the students, even people, normal people.
Okay, a lot of Shashi sir, creativity goes when you are actually drawing a picture. You are putting creativity to use. But by creative writing, what I am actually meaning is imaginative, fictional writing. So can we use it in science classes? Have you ever thought about it? I know it can be done. I believe it can be done, but then
There,
how?
there are various methods. It could be use of analogy or role play or maybe a gamification
Hmm.
and so on. There are lots of
So may I
pedagogy.
know your name?
I am Chandra Kumar. Hello. Am I audible?
Hello. I think there is network issue from Vandana ma'am side. Please wait.
Please bear with us while we sort out the problem.
I think network issue is there from Vandana ma'am side.
Yes, I had lost my connection. Am I audible now?
Yes, madam, you are audible.
Sorry for the disturbance. There was some network issue at my end. So I'll share the screen again.
Yeah, no issue.
अच्छा.
Looks like she has some network issue. Let's wait.
Yes, sir. Yes, we can wait, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, my mic was muted. Am I audible, sir? Okay, sorry for the disturbance. Actually, network is very weak here at my place. So we were actually talking about something very important. And my question to my academic fraternity was that can we put creative writing to use in the world of science? And we were actually having certain very good observations also, right? So sir, apart from the fact that creative writing is really important in today's world where there is so much of stress and there are so many problems, but apart from that, creative writing can be really put to use in actually teaching, in day to day teaching in science classes also. For example, I actually happened to hear one of my friends from sciences telling me that basically used to deal with the students of school, that if she had to teach them characteristics of virus rather than teaching them it directly, she would actually make them write a story. So she'll say that you just write down a story about a virus which has attacked the world recently, and this virus actually changes everyone to zombies. Now the moment zombies is brought, everyone gets interested. Kids are really interested in this, right? So but then when actually they start doing the fiction piece and when they start talking about the features, what they come up with are the actual characteristics of the virus, right? So some of them might go imaginative to the extent that they'll actually think about something very noble also, but majority of the times what they actually define or they include in the discussions are the real characteristics of the virus. So the moment it is done, what happens is that once and for all, they're through the features of the virus and they'll never forget it. So though creative writing is necessary for the world, because as human beings, our needs are not only, you had a lecture with Guru sir in the morning, right? So already you must have thought about this. The spiritual aspect of living, right? Now materialistic aspect of life is important, but spiritual aspect of life is also very important. And a lot of stress, frustration, anger which we see in present society is because in our mad race of materialism we have forgotten our spiritual needs. And as human beings we need peace. Whether we believe in soul or not, it doesn't matter, but what is true is that all of us need to feel powerful, all of us need to be at peace, and all of us actually need to feel the purity which is there in us. And no material acquisitions can actually make us get that. So spiritual needs ultimately surface. So whatever faith, cult, practice you follow, latest religion is religion of humanity, isn't it? So religion is a way of life, and the latest one which we all have chosen to believe in is that of humanity. So we are here to actually cultivate highest ideals for humanity, right? So any which ways, if you do not think about spiritually also the spiritual aspect, then also creative writing actually can be made useful to the students of science, and it can actually attract their attention. So next time when you actually deal with your students and you have to tell them about some complicated concept, please consider if you can use creative writing or some fiction to make it interesting and appealing to them all. So we'll proceed further now. Yes. So, in my next phase of discussions, I had planned that we would be talking about editing and proofreading in academic writing. So, editing and proofreading also is very important in academic writing. Once your draft is ready, right, then this phase comes, that of editing and proofreading. Now editing and proofreading is very important because you get to see whether there is clarity of ideas in your paper or not, in your text or not, whether the arguments have been properly defended or not, and then you also get to see the spelling, punctuation, grammatical errors. So it is essential that you actually proofread your essays and you give sufficient time to editing. Now let me ask my fellow friends, how much time you keep for editing? So those you who have been writing papers, sir, how much time do we need for editing and proofreading? Quickly, you can use chat box to write, right? A few hours, 1 day, 2 day. How much time you believe is essential for editing and proofreading? Yes, participants.
Ma'am, it depends on the length of the manuscript actually.
Very true, very true. So
if it is a 10 pages paper, research paper, then it might take 3 to 4 days.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Even it becomes less, 3 to 4 days it also become less. Because when we do proofreading and editing, it takes time and we think that, okay, some ideas are left, so let us discuss them once again.
Very true. May I know your name, sir?
Ma'am, Anil Patil.
Yes, Anil sir. Okay, Shilpa madam believes 1 day, Kavya madam believes it depends on number of pages. Others, do you agree that we need 3 to 4 days? Or others? Yes, Sunil sir, 2 to 3 days. Others?
1 day when when we have drafted our article and we know everything about it, then we can take 1 day. But if we are checking from other persons or any other person, then it will go for 3 or 4 days or even for 1 week also.
Yes, very true. But what actually I would recommend is that you actually keep 2 days, minimum 2 days for proofreading, even if it is your own piece. And if it is that of someone else, then as Anusha madam also says, some 4 days should be kept for it. Why? I'll tell you, because sometimes you are required to not only read it but reread it, and there are so many steps which are involved in this proofreading process, and there are so many things which you have to be careful about, right? So I have brought a checklist to you all. Normally what happens is that we actually give a lot of time to the development of argument, comparatively less time to the referencing part, and still lesser time to editing and proofreading. And this is most dangerous. Keeping less time, giving less time to editing and proofreading is very dangerous. Then what happens? At times it culminates into modifications or revisions of paper, and if the errors are too many, then it might lead to rejection also, right? So you have to be really, watchful. You have to be careful that you at least give 2 days to editing and proofreading, and you make sure that you have actually gone through every piece, and then there should be a gap between, if you're doing your own paper, if you are editing or proofreading your own paper, then what I recommend is that the experts recommend is that at least 2 days time should be kept, and there should be a gap between writing of the paper and proofreading. If you can afford, then you should take a break of at least a day before you actually proofread, because what happens is that when we have ideas floating in our mind, then we happen to read what is there in mind, and at times what is written there, it's slightly different, small grammatical errors, punctuation errors, spelling errors, so they are likely to be left if you actually do not take a break between writing and editing phase. So it is recommended that at least a day break should be there. Then at least 2 days you should reserve, so that you can get to visit the text, and not only visit but revisit also. Now, what are the things which we need to watch out? So let's talk about the checklist. So you have to, and then yes, if you're actually checking the academic paper of your scholar or your students, then also the steps would apply, right? So, but now I am talking about if I am doing a paper, if you all are doing a paper, then what are the things you should keep in mind? So, what I have written fits the assignment. So, the paper also at times publishes, no, so their area of interest. So whether it actually suits it, fits it, that you have to see, because we choose journals and then we make submissions. So whatever journal you have actually chosen to submit it, it should be of such nature as the areas of interest match. Otherwise, what will happen? Even if the paper is very good, you can still have rejection where the editors may say that it doesn't suit our interest. And that is very discouraging, because it takes a lot of time. Reviewing process sometimes takes 6 months also. 2 to 3 months is minimum, 6-7 months also. So if you get rejection on this ground after 6 to 7 months, it would be very disheartening. So you have to make sure that the submission is being made to which journal, and it suits the area of interest of that journal or not. And not only the topic, but the format and the content, whether it is as expected by them or not. Then the hypothesis, can it be written in one clear sentence? If yes, there is clarity in it or not. So hypothesis should be actually clear and should be capable. You should be in a position to tell it in a sentence. Such clarity should be there in your thesis statement, right? It's main problem statement or hypothesis, right? Then I have provided adequate, yes, questions will take later on, right? You may please note it down, right? So whether I have provided adequate background information for the topic of my paper or not. Suppose there is an idea which actually needs some background information, then you cannot assume, where you have to know the audience to whom you are writing, and on the basis of that audience you have to assume how much they'll be knowing and what is actually which is required, right? So adequate background information is essential. Then you have to make sure that each portion actually connects to the main thesis statement. Then yes, so you have to check that within each portion you are introducing PTS form, right? Paragraph, topic, sentence form is there. So you introduce the idea which you're going to talk in that paragraph. Then you are actually talking about it, giving supporting evidence, developing the discussion, and then conclusion. Then whether you have used a variety of reliable academic resources to support your ideas or not, right? If you want your point to be taken, then sufficient evidence is required. For example, we are all, we all dissent, love to dissent, love to disagree. Academic fraternity encourages it. And for any critical writing to happen, it is important, so important that at times I tell my students that purpose of education is to teach you note of dissent. You should have the courage to disagree, and you should have the knowledge, understanding, and inclination to it, right? So within each portion, you have to make sure that resources are used which actually help you prove your point. And then if I paraphrase my resources more often than I quote them directly. So paraphrasing is important. Why? Instead of every time quoting the source is discouraged, because somehow the flow breaks. So when you're actually developing your argument, if you paraphrase, you can refer to others' work, but still you can maintain your own voice, your own discussion and argument, right? But if you actually quote it, then it actually breaks the flow. So it is advisable that you should actually paraphrase more than using direct quotations. Use direct quotations only when it is very essential. After that, whether you have followed the style guide strictly or not.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Ma'am, please, we'll reserve it towards the end.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So because I have defined my timelines and there is sufficient space for question and answer session also, right? So whether you have used style guide properly or not, different domains actually propose different style guides. So sometimes it is APA, sometimes MLA, sometimes Chicago. So you have to make sure that you have your every entry is correct according to that style guide. Then your conclusion actually briefly summarizes the information of the paper and is still relevant. This is what you have to talk about, right? Then you have actually used straightforward professional tone in your paper. Then last, spelling and grammar. Once you have actually assessed the content part, then you actually focus on the presentation part, and then spelling and grammar comes. And to check spelling and grammar, what is recommended is that you read the paper loud. And when you're reading the paper loud, if you gasp for breath, if the sentences are too long, then it is suggested that you break it into shorter sentences if possible, because that would make it better, right? Then you should be using strong verbs in your sentences that actually propel your readers forward, so that actually motivates your readers to think about it instead of actually using weak verbs. So it is very important that we use strong verbs. So what are strong verbs? What could be strong verbs? Verbs like challenge, verbs like contradict or disagree or reject also, if you feel that you're rejecting a thesis statement or an argument. Then some, if you're confirming, then I confirm this, or I complement or substantiate, I support. So such powerful, strong verbs should be used in your sentences. You should be using active voice as often as possible, and you should be putting effort in eliminating redundant words, adverbs, and adjectives, right? So when you're talking about grammar, spelling and grammar, punctuation also should be carefully checked. Then at times we recommend that we are slow in catching our own errors, because it's our baby, our paper is our baby, our artwork. So at times, we fail to notice the errors because we are actually, it is in mind and we are reading it right. Even if black and white, it deviates. So if you feel that it happens with you, then you can consider peer reviewing also. You can actually ask your friend to actually read it for you and just give a structure to it. Skeleton structure. So whenever you tell your friend to review, what is it you'll tell him? That give a skeleton structure. So that if that skeleton structure is clear and well ordered, it means that there is clarity and it's good enough. And if not, then obviously your friend will help you know. And if you cannot go for it, then you can actually consider hiring an editor also if it is so required. Right? So another break time. We have actually talked about editing and proofreading. We'll be taking your question towards the end, ma'am, right? Okay. So I have a question to you all, to my fellow teachers. And the question is, do Indians lack in research aptitude? There is a charge against Indians by the international community. And the charge is that Indians actually do not have research aptitude. And they say that this is the reason why we do not have any significant inventions and discoveries and patents from India, right? So do you agree with this? Do we lack in research aptitude or not? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. All are having research aptitude, ma'am. Everybody is doing, ma'am.
Okay. But then why is it that we... Okay. So first let us answer in yes or no, and then we'll actually come to the next step. So how many of you believe this statement, this charge to be true against Indians, that Indians lack in research aptitude? So yes or no? Anusha madam says yes, we are complacent. Others, do you believe it to be true or not? You agree or disagree? Please, quick. Others. A serious charge. I am not actually weaving it myself. It is a charge against us by the international community. So Sunil sir says no, Shashi sir says no, then Padmavati ma'am says no, Paban Mohanty sir says agrees. Okay, yes. So yes, others say no. We'll talk about it. Yes. Okay, so majority say no. Now, my question to you all is, if you do not feel it to be right, if you really feel that, yes, we do have research aptitude, then why is it that we do not have any significant patents and discoveries and inventions to our credit compared to the world? What is the reason behind it? What do you think? Do we lack in research culture? What is the reason? Majority
Madam,
believe that we have research aptitude.
certain
So-
policy issues are there, madam, which
Okay.
like really inhibit these kind of things.
Hmm,
Otherwise, like IITs and IIMs, they are doing wonderful things.
Sir, but I have a question. While I have deep regard for these institutions, IITs and all, still, why is it that we do not get so many patents, inventions, discoveries from
Madam,
IITs?
again, that's what I mean to say. Certain policy issues are there. There will be an open debate regarding these aspects.
Mhm.
Basically, that sincerity index is missing. Otherwise, aptitude is there.
Mhm.
But if like you are guiding somebody and that some of the student is not willing to do certain amount of work, then at the end of the day, you'll be like wondering, ki, okay, get the thesis submitted, do whatever you want in your future.
Mhm.
And in most of the systems, be it government or private system, these kind of practices are being followed. Otherwise, there is no lack of attitude and aptitude. But basically, if we are going to stop these kind of practices, then there will be patents and researches going on in nice numbers everywhere. Only the thing is, policy issues needs to be fixed upon. That's it.
So, just policy issues, we have research aptitude and culture and everything. Do we have research culture also?
Definitely, madam. In school days, we are having very good schooling system. Be it a government school or private schools, we are doing wonderful.
Do we have, sir? I have an objection. I would actually register my objection to it. Somehow, the school system has been so structured that it discourages the inquisitiveness, essential prerequisite of a critique, right?
Madam, again, it is a policy issue. Like in this corona pandemic, how many parents and how many students are willing to go to school? Most of the time, we'll be listening, no.
Yes, I agree with it, because first you have to live. Actually, then only you can make any significant contribution.
But madam, when everything is open, every aspect of economy is open, then why we are keeping the most important aspect of our country closed? I don't understand the reason. In foreign, almost all the education institutions are open. They are giving first and foremost emphasis on school education only and college education only.
Sir. Let us, okay, fine, taken that students should go to school because maximum learning can take place there only. Meaningful learning can take place there only.
Yes.
But then what is it that teachers do in school? Strength of 60, 70, they come, they deliver a lecture, give ready-made answers, ask the students. Is it not story of every household that the younger kid, if you will tell them, look, I am a teacher of English. If I'll tell my daughter, look, I am telling you it is wrong, still she'll insist. No, I'll write this only because madam has told to write this way. So,
Exactly.
Madam, is it a problem?
In certain cases, like you may be correct, but like considering the size of our country, the kind of infrastructure we have, I don't feel it is like in central schools. I studied in central school. I never found any problem related to academic policies of the school. I traveled throughout the country for my schooling.
I am a product of KV, sir, and I really appreciate this thing that KV teachers have been so trained that they don't discourage questioning. But if you look out and if you see the private setup, if you see other schools, then you'll find that somehow they discourage the spirit of questioning. So students are not made to find answers, but they are given ready-made answers and they have to just write it. And I'll tell you the dangerous result of it. When they come to university and suddenly we tell them you have to find your answers, then they're clueless. And what do? They do not start finding answers, they Google.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I tell my students, look, I don't want to know what Google thinks or what people on Google think about it. I know what they think. I want to know what you think about it. And it takes a lot of conscious energy and effort for people to make them believe that you're capable of thinking.
Madam, that's what I told you, certain policy issues are there which needs to be resolved. Basically, those things have inculcated wrong practices in our system.
Yes.
And if like we are going to freeze them, I think most of the things will be in order for the generations to come.
Why I chose to bring this question here on this platform that we are teachers. At present, we are some 81 teachers. If we can actually commit ourselves to this, that we have to develop this research aptitude in our students, and we teach them thinking, keeping this in mind, that they have to go for research after it, then I think it can be changed. If the teachers do not take initiative, nothing can be changed.
And we need to be the torch bearers, ma'am, basically.
Okay, that's why I began with that teacher, enlightened, emancipated, empowered teachers, because we need to understand our role. And if we are committed enough that in spite of every, problem, be it politics, of publication, of organization, still we can actually, make our students develop and actually explore and, make use of that research aptitude thing. So it was good talking about. Now we'll go back to our the main focus of the talk today.
And one more issue with the students is that, as
Yes,
I am a
ma'am.
professor in engineering college, students
Yes, ma'am.
always ask about what is the placement. They don't want to study. They want that they got more placed in a good MNC or not before entering into the college.
Yes, madam, you're from engineering. I did not wanted to say this, but majority of the IITians, they do not take research later on. So they take a job with some management company and they forget the research and on everything. So there is some problem with the system, government. It's not the problem with the students. It's the problem with the government and the setup which we have. So we are not giving sufficient money, sufficient opportunities for the students actually to go in research, and therefore they want to get placed with other companies instead of some research facility. So we have to work on infrastructure, of course, and then also yes.
Vandana ma'am,
Students में
Yes,
infrastructure develop भी करते हैं, then because of the lack of resources, we can't do this.
No, so but then if we are actually intent upon it, then startups can be there. Still, we can give the students with an eye. So we can take
Vandana
a
ma'am.
They are not in the field of the research.
yes. Okay, we'll take another. Yes,
ma'am,
sir.
may I
Yes.
share just few points?
Sure.
Ma'am, we are on the right track of the problem solving, I think. See, it is motivation is missing, I think. If we talk about engineering graduates, and not only engineering, everywhere, if we just motivate, if the government, or not only government, NGOs and the firms which can motivate the people, graduates, to start their startups, small businesses. Obviously, research and startups can be a bloom in next few years, but that is missing. Now
Very true.
empowerment is missing, startups are missing, everything, and we think that we always say that okay, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Very true.
But we think, if it is necessary, I will not do it. Let someone else do. That is why I think we lack research. There is no research.
A lot of motivation and a lot of concerted
motivation
effort
is
should
missing.
go, sir. A
And
lot of
human beings are right. They are trained to do certain compulsory things. So research has to be made compulsory. As Shashi sir said just now, policy issues are of course the main issue, madam.
Yes, very true. And for that, I think if anyone can make any change, then we, the teachers, are the ones. And if we cannot change it, no one else can. Because ultimately, those whom we are training will take over. If they are inspired enough, then they'll change the policies and make things work also. So we teachers have to think in this direction and work in this direction with a focused and positive attitude. I think then in the longer run, India has had a great past, right? So if we can change it into talking about past is of no use, because everyone will ask what now. So we have to believe that we can make that change, and we have to work in this direction. So we'll now quickly, my job was to make you all think. And when you all have started thinking about it, my job is done, right? So we'll proceed further to the next phase of our discussion. So after this, I wanted to talk to you all about summarizing and paraphrasing. Why summarizing and paraphrasing? Because they are really important. And in research, when you are doing research papers, you actually put these to use, summarizing and paraphrasing. So Joseph Pulitzer, he came out with an excellent observation. So I would like to read it to you all. Put it before them briefly, so they will read it. Clearly, so they will appreciate it. Picturesquely, so they will remember it. And above all, accurately, so they will be guided by its light. So when we are actually summarizing, paraphrasing, doing papers and things, all these things should be kept in mind, that you are actually doing something which will further the tradition of knowledge, and therefore conscious, serious attitude, commitment is what is require, right? Now, summarizing and paraphrasing, I said that both these things are put to use in doing research papers, right? So, paraphrasing is used more often when doing research writings because at times what happens, you have a line of thought, you have a topic, and you are putting up a defense for it. Then what happens that other ideas of other researchers, they go well with what you are actually talking about. But if you stop and quote, then your flow of thought will be broken. So for this, paraphrasing is used. So you use their idea, their word, their take, but you'll be putting it in your own words. So paraphrasing becomes even more important when writing research papers or when doing academic writing, right? So summarizing and paraphrasing. We all know what summarizing is, what paraphrasing is. We have read about it and we have done it previously also. So what are the, wait a second. So, what are the points we have to keep in mind before we actually start summarizing or paraphrasing? So, you have to remember that you have to work on your reading comprehension. So, you have to really practice that you're good at it. Then, you have to filter the main ideas from the details. No matter whether you're doing summarizing or paraphrasing, the main ideas still would be your focus, right? So, you are in a position to filter the main ideas. Then, you are in a position to follow the arguments, identify the key points, understand the thematic concerns, and differentiate fact from opinion. This is something very important, very, very important. Whenever you're doing a research paper, you have to discuss, debate, and develop your grounds on the basis of facts and not opinions much, right? So one or two places opinion would do, but one should not actually, deal much with opinions. Why we should be slow in actually talking about opinions? Can anyone say? I am saying that one should never debate on facts. Opinions, sorry. We should debate on facts because when we are developing our arguments, sometimes we are debating also, right? So opinions, people should discourage actually to debate on them. Why? Why we should be slow in talking or debating about opinions? Why we should only focus on facts? Yes? Kavya, madam? Anyone else?
I had just one small question related to paraphrasing of quotes. Right? Like you said that we should paraphrase quotes. Is it allowed?
Paraphrasing of quotes. When you paraphrase, then you do not put it in quotation. You simply do it in text citation, madam. Quotations are used, right? Paraphrasing, the moment you quote it, quoting means quoting it word by word. So you do not quote it actually while paraphrasing. So when you are paraphrasing, you use in-text citation to tell that yes, this idea comes from there. So when you are quoting, then it's not paraphrasing actually. We'll take the questions later on, ma'am. Please note it down. I have sufficient time for question answer session, so that should not go, silently. So, why my question to you all was be slow in talking about opinions. Why? Because no matter how strong you defend yourself, you cannot actually make people change their opinions. So you should talk about facts. You should actually deal with facts because if facts can be proven, opinions you cannot prove. Actually, it's subjective. It's highly subjective. So after all argument, also the other side will say no. Still, I choose to believe this. So one should be very slow in actually entertaining opinions in a research paper or a critical paper. It's more often in practice in humanities and social sciences. So science's domain is facts. So they are slow in entertaining opinions. The moment we actually come to humanities and social sciences, then opinions actually start, taking the lead. But then in humanities and social sciences also, my take would be that be slow in registering opinions and then developing your papers on the basis of those opinions because it's very less likely for people to change their opinions. So when you're doing a paper, better actually find out actual information, on the basis of it develop your hypothesis and then do the paper. Then it will be taken well and it would be making some meaningful contribution. And then last point which you should remember before you embark upon your journey to summarizing and paraphrasing is you have to analyze the text also, right? Yes. So Steps to summarizing. Now, this is something we all know, but still, I thought that because long we had practiced it, so let us talk about it quickly. So, if you have to summarize, then you have to select a passage that supports your idea. You have to read it carefully to understand it. And I recommend my students to go for 3 readings because research paper is something serious. So, first time, just skim it, bird eye view you take. Second time, you start noticing important details. And third time, when you read it, you underline. I always suggest the students not to underline or pinpoint the points which you'll be using in the first reading, because when you read it for the first time, everything seems important. When you read it second time, some information gets filtered. And when you read it third time, then you get pure information, which would be really useful. So I always suggest that if possible, whatever you are actually going to use, in your paper, you should be reading that passage or paragraph at least thrice, right? Then, and if you have understood it well, then 2 readings also would suffice. But I always discourage reading it once and then, going about it. So read it carefully till you understand. It may take 2 to 3 readings. Then take notes about the main points and ideas and supporting points you think you should be including in your summary, right? Then include keywords and terms used by the author and think too, right, about how the source idea is relevant to the argument you are presenting in your paper. So when you are doing summary, when you are doing summary, all these things should be kept in mind. After that, yes, use your notes. So you have read the paper, it's a passage, you have understood it, you have made your notes. After that, you're summarizing, because summary means you do not have to follow it word by word. So you'll keep that text aside and using your notes. Your notes means your understanding of every important detail of the paragraph. So using just your notes and not the original text, you write down your line of thoughts. So explain the original author's main ideas to someone if you actually want to gain more clarity. Then explain how those ideas actually support the argument you are making or conflict your argument. So both ways we use the information to defend ourselves or actually to put up a counter perspective and then prove it wrong. So it can be used both ways, right? So then you go about doing it. Reread the original source once your line of thought is ready. Then is there any important information that you have forgotten or misremembered? You just match it. And then you see whether your summary is similar to the original source or not. And if it is yes, if it's all sorted, then you can actually put that summary into your research and you can use in-text citation where you actually cite down from where you have taken this information, right? And adding in-text citation is very important, and that too in the proper formatting style which you are using. Why? Because I'll be talking about plagiarism towards the end of the discussion session, right? So why? Because plagiarism is something which should be avoided at any cost, right? So now steps to paraphrasing. So what are the things we have to keep in mind while paraphrasing? So paraphrasing is when you don't want to put quotation, but you want to use the ideas, all the ideas which are there in the passage. So you have to reword it. You have to restructure the argument to suit your style, the size, the paper which you are doing. So how do we do it? Reading is the same. We read it again and again till we have understood the thing. Then we underline the main points. I recommend doing it in third reading. Then we try to find, you can use thesaurus also. You try to find out synonyms of difficult words and then you change the words and you don't change the meaning. You just change the words. You'd use synonyms and all. Why do we use synonyms and all? To make it easy. So the purpose of paraphrasing is to make it easy. Then you break long sentences into smaller sentences and then you simplify the structure of the sentences. Main intention behind paraphrasing is to make that complex idea reachable, accessible, simple, right? And therefore you simplify it. Paraphrasing is sometimes larger in length than the original piece also because it intends simplifying. More or less, it is same in length. So, unlike summary, it is same in length. It is not short, right? Now, what can be done while paraphrasing? You can change the order of the ideas presented. You have to change the voice. Then you have to use quotation marks if you are actually borrowing terms and phrases. So if you're, yes, madam, while paraphrasing, if you use terms and phrases which are exact of the author, where you have not changed anything, then you'll use it, put quotation marks, because they're exact ideas which you have copied there. So you can use quotation marks also. But if you have changed them, then you'll be using in-text citation to quote the source, but you would not be using quotation marks. So quotation marks will go if any line is similar to the line of the exact copy of the line from the original text, then it should go in quotation marks. Then cite original ideas that are not your own. If you borrow idea and the idea is not your own, then you do not forget to cite the original text. In-text citation must be given. After that, proofread your paraphrase so that you know whether you are actually doing plagiarism or not. Accidental plagiarism. At times, what happens while paraphrasing is accidental plagiarism. So if we have to avoid accidental plagiarism, we have to read it and we have to compare it with the original to make sure that we are not actually indulging in what is called accidental plagiarism. And the 4 R's of paraphrasing is what you have to keep in mind. So what are the 4 R's? Read, to understand, then restate, so you actually put it in your words, in your voice, then recheck, check to see whether you have included all the points or not, and then repair. So accidentally you have not used any wrong or incorrect information, that also should be taken care of, right? Okay, so this is all about proofreading and editing. Question answer session. So whatever questions you all have, we'll take them towards the end. So this is last break, which I intend to take in this course. And my question to you all is, do you appreciate military talk? Yes or no? Quickly, chat box is there. Participants, 81 are there. If I get 40, I'll believe that you are not sleeping. If I don't get 40, I'll actually believe that you are not listening. So please, do you appreciate military? I have, and your time is valuable, sir. So everything which I'll bring here, I'll bring it because I seriously consider it is important for you to reflect upon it, right? So your time is valuable, and still I ask this question, so I have some meaning attached to it. Quickly, yes or no? Do you appreciate military talk? Yes? I repeat. Do we appreciate military talk? Military talk means when you are actually trying to tell someone do something, then you raise the tempo of your voice, you actually have a commanding voice and you are actually threatening that person, or you actually want that person to follow your orders and everything. So do, yes or no? Do you appreciate military talk or not? I believe answer is no for all. Yes?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am, we don't appreciate.
Okay, good. But then, do we indulge in military talk? At times when we are talking to our students, at times when we are actually talking to our scholars, at times when we are talking to our own kids, we end up actually indulging in military talk by not because actually we like it.
Recording stopped.
But
Recording
because,
in progress.
yes, but because there is so much of pressure, right? And there are so many things which actually are required to be done, and there is not sufficient time where you can actually allow people that much space. So at times we end up indulging in what is military talk. So how can this military talk be avoided in classroom settings? So I actually have brought this idea to you all. At times we complain that the students are not good, and we end up indulging in military talk because we feel that students are not responding, they're not good, they're not smart enough. So as teachers, I come from an area where actually students come from underprivileged and very backward places also, and they do not have access to quality education in their schools. So sometimes the situation is such that they are not in a position to write two proper sentences in English also, and we have to teach them literature. So our job starts with language. So our job is not to give them the language, but still the state is this. But I tell this to my students, right? That do not think that we deserve smart, self-motivated, hardworking students who do not really need to be taught. The moment you actually believe that, yes, These are the students who absolutely need us. I often feel that the students who are self-motivated, who are smart, who are hardworking, they any which ways they'll actually improve, they'll grow, and they'll make their significant contribution to society. But those students who are not smart enough, those students who are not self-motivated, those students who are not enlightened enough, or hardworking enough, if we can change them by conscious effort, then our contribution to the world, it would be significant. For example, if a student is there and he can just on the basis of his current approach, if he can just make a living of some he can actually earn after the studies hardly 10,000 or 15,000, and if my conscious effort, it changes him slightly also, and he rises to 20-25,000 level also, means expertise is such that he can get this much money or make this much contribution, then my contribution to the society would be significant, because I'm not changing just one person, but I'm changing a household, a society, and that way a community. So whenever you find that your students are wanting in something, it requires conscious effort, extra effort, then please do not hesitate, because if we can change them, then our contribution to the nation would be significant, very, very important. There are many students who come to me and they tell me, ma'am, whatever we could do. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, why not?
Why all the PhD guide behaves like Hitler to their scholars?
They do. That's what I'm saying. That we have to be slow in this. At times, it discourages actual research. Also, if the attitude of guide is that rigid, then what happens is that the scholar, under the pressure of delivery, ends up in excess. So as research guides, I had two scholars, who have already completed their thesis under me. Feel is that research guides role becomes even more important. You have to actually nurture them, for research, because the school setup and system had been such that many times you might not expect them to be having that research aptitude, realized already. It is there, but the change will come when you realize that you have that research aptitude. So for that, every teacher, not only scholar, has to understand that if you can change someone who is not self-motivated, smart enough, hardworking enough, and you can change that person, transform that person into something useful to society, your contribution would be unique. And you know that student needs us the most. Those who are self-motivated would be like Eklavya. They can read anywhere. Right? But those students who are not...
Madam, sometimes the scholars get faded and attempt for suicide also, because when they spend almost time, near about 6 to 7 years, not getting their degree, but the reviewed voice sometimes, what can I say? I have no word for that.
No, I have this experience also, around. Yes, the pressure actually takes toll on people, and if they're clueless, if the research supervisor says you're good for nothing, poor scholar would believe it to be true, and then the impact would be disastrous. So if you tell the students they're good for nothing, they believe it, sirs, and therefore you have to be really conscious enough. We have to be enthusiastic, we have to be self-motivated, we have to be sincere, and we have to be objective, and we have to be willing to work, and then we can change the situation, right? And the teaching fraternity should have a desire to change for better, because if anyone can change the society, then do you believe in it or not? So can teachers bring the change?
Yes, madam, I believe it may be changes in some days.
Yes. So I thought that I should be talking to you all about this, because somehow this COVID period had been really full of stress for us also.
Madam, 1 second, I interpret. Yes, the NEP, the National Education Policy, can motivate the teachers to bending toward the teachers, towards the students, instead of rude voice to love and attract the peoples for more glory of our Indian education.
A very good question, sir. First and foremost, my take on new education policy is that it is first solid attempt at decolonizing the Indian mind. So spirit of the new education policy is very good, but there are some loopholes. and we the teachers actually can, change everything to suit us, right? And our role becomes really important if we will take pains to read the new. I was a part of the committee of my university, which actually deliberated upon the draft of the new education policy, and we actually gave our recommendations to the Minister of Education also. So we happened to not only read the draft but also deliberate upon it. So what I felt was that we have been complaining about the colonized minds which we are having. So we appreciate everything English, but somehow we are slow in appreciating things Indian. This has become, a nature of all of us. But if any unique contribution, one question about research, lacking in research is this also, because majority of the times, those who have, the ability, they feel crippled because of language also, because there is no research facility available in our own languages, right? So if we can allow the space where people can think in their own language and talk about it in their own language, maybe our research index also would increase. So that is important for research also, that we actually understand the true intent of new education policy, and we take pains to actually, like, it's a family actually, education family, academic fraternity, we all of us. So there are loopholes in the policy, and we have to make sure that the spirit of the policy never gets frustrated. And if we will do that, I can actually assert it, I can actually promise is that we can change things for better, but only when we are not lethargic, when we are willing to put in efforts, right? So for that, each stakeholder, each teacher, each academician, and those in administrative positions, they have to read the policy draft, and they have to actually understand the intent, the spirit, and then they have to come up with a plan how they are going to use it in their practice, day-to-day practice, right? So if we are actually willing to do this, then I think nothing can stop us from being number one, because human resource is something which can make all the difference if we actually can direct it properly, right? Then nothing can stop us, right? Okay. So in classrooms, I actually thought that classroom principle of classroom management, right? What can be one word for classroom management? I always tell my fellow teachers in training programs that the moment you enter into the classroom, go into rest mode. Yes, rest mode. Classroom management principle, I said that, remember, it is rest. Now, what kind of rest? Where rest would stand for recognize the issues, problems, needs of the students, eliminate the problems, hindrances in the learning process, then spend time in understanding the students so that you can actually evaluate their growth. You can see where they are, and from there, where you have to take them where. So you can define for yourself the path. If you spend some time with your students and you understand their needs well, right? Then give them some time. So the moment you go into the classroom, do not be in a hurry. So because it's not your job just to render the information and forget about it. Your job is to make sure that they understand the information is taken, the information is received. So the moment you go in your classroom, forget about all that is there outside the classroom and follow this principle of rest. Be at your age, give proper time, make you believe that there is sufficient time to address the gaps in learning, and to make them, to prepare them capable of learning, to give them time which they'll require to learn. So believe it to be true. If you believe it to be true and you'll work towards it, then you'll find out ways also of doing it, right? Okay. So do you believe it to be true? Can anyone actually suggest any other things we should keep in mind for meaningful learning to take place in classrooms? The new education policy emphasizes this. One thing which is very beautiful, I should not say beautiful because it is not the right word, but which is very good about the new education policy is that it lays emphasis on learning as a lifelong process. Right? So learning is a lifelong process. It doesn't stop with the school or college learning, university learning. And it's a process of learning and self-discovery. So basically, you are actually helping the students take their path to learning and self-discovery. And once they learn this art, they cultivate the art, they become capable of self-discovery. then nothing will stop them from actually learning and growing and contributing significantly. Right?
Recording stopped.
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Yes. So, yes, participants, do you actually believe it to be true?
Yes.
Yes, madam. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I take it as a commitment. We'll together commit ourselves to this thing. I actually take time sometimes to make commitments that yes, because in this mad race of performance where there is so much of pressure actually of delivering the results, right? Of API scorecards and so many things, right? So it becomes difficult at times. But we are first and foremost teachers, and therefore this is something which should be kept in mind. So we'll proceed further to the next section of our talk, and which is really significant. It is about plagiarism, right? So what is plagiarism? We've been talking, we all know about it, right? So plagiarism is when you use someone else's ideas and put it as your own. And this is something which should be discouraged, and this is something which is actually dangerously harmful for entire, academic community. So different forms of plagiarism are there, and sometimes unintentionally we actually end up in indulging in what is known as plagiarism. So different types of plagiarism are there. Complete plagiarism. What is complete? Have you all talked already about plagiarism? Yes.
Yes, madam. We are faced lots of time for plagiarism.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then what we can do, we can discuss, right? So what does complete plagiarism mean actually?
Madam, I am also in doubt because when I write my manuscript, I just take the statement of one scientist, which cannot we modify it because they are direct own statement. Like energy cannot be created nor be destroyed. It is stated by the scientist, particular scientist. We cannot change it. Like E is equal to mc square. We cannot change. When we are copying it and try to insert in our manuscript and check by Torrentine, so it shows the plagiarisms. So, madam, we are just doubtful. Please clarify it.
Yes. So such issues are there. So basically, this is the reason why sometimes people say that 5 to 10% of plagiarism is, what can be ignored also. Because of such crippling circumstances, only it is said that. At times, it is recommended that you use just inverted commas, right? To actually, help with such situations where some details are there which are actually a part of day-to-day thought, and then you actually cannot go about quoting everything, but still in such cases this can be recommended. For example, in humanities and social sciences, what we do, we put such things in italics or at least in commas, inverted commas, right? Because at least the ideas actually belong to someone else. Now there are different types of plagiarism. We all know, and as you said that we are from teaching fraternity, we have been into research all the time. So my purpose in putting this here was to make you think about it once again. And when you go back, when you indulge in that academic enterprise again, you are rejuvenated, and you actually take into consideration everything. So complete plagiarism, when you actually copy the entire thing without giving any credit to the original writer. Source based plagiarism, when you are actually using information but you are not giving proper citation, so you actually are giving wrong references and all, then it might come in source based references. Plagiarism, direct plagiarism, is actually when you present someone else's paper as your own, right? So direct plagiarism is there. Then self or auto plagiarism, this is something which I wanted to talk to you all about. When you actually go for such software checks, at times, have you had any experience that our own paper is there and our own ideas are there, and then the plagiarism software tells us that this has been copied from here. So it is recommended that you have to be sure of self, not actually going for what is known as auto plagiarism or self plagiarism. Also means if you have published an article somewhere, and if you are using the ideas of our hypothesis of that article once again, then you must cite, right? Why? Because this is another form. In our next step, we'll be talking about this, right? So, what are different publication ethics which one needs to actually be careful about to follow. So in publication ethics, there are certain things like redundant publication and duplicate publication and salami slicing. So if you indulge in any such thing, then at times what happens is self-plagiarism. So once you have published a paper somewhere, after that you cannot actually publish those very same ideas to any other manuscript, any other journal, without citing. If you need that idea to develop your argument and you have added to that existing lot of knowledge, then you would be bound to refer to it. But then you have to quote yourself also to avoid you have to cite the original source there to avoid self-plagiarism. Then as at times we end up in what is paraphrasing plagiarism. So you end up paraphrasing the ideas of someone else. Means this is what is the easiest way. This is done by research scholars, paraphrasing plagiarism. So they'll actually use the ideas of someone else, they'll reword it, rephrase it, they'll change the structure of the sentences and grammar, and then what happens? The software doesn't check for error because every word and structure of the sentence is already changed, the order is changed. So it will not show on software. But then this is very unethical. So paraphrasing plagiarism also should be avoided. Inaccurate authorship, when you are actually not careful enough to cite the original source. Then there is mosaic plagiarism. Scholars actually do indulge in this also. So they mix the ideas of people. So some ideas from here, some ideas from there, and their paper ready, right? So mosaic plagiarism also should be avoided. Then accidental plagiarism, when you accidentally forget to cite and you actually take someone else's information and present it as your own. So accidental plagiarism also should be avoided, right? Now, if we talk about different publication ethics, right, then some problems which have been seen with the practices of publication are the scholars end up in publishing, what would be redundant publication. Now, redundant, duplicate, and overlapping publications. Somehow the steps which they follow are more or less same. The intensity varies. So redundant publication is actually duplicate publication, like duplicate publication only. So repeated publication, you can say here. So when you write a paper and you actually submit it to many journals, right? Then what you are actually doing is, why? Because the reviewing process is very long. So at times what happens, we feel like submitting it to 2 or 3 journals so that at least one gets published somewhere. But then if this is a wrong practice and should be discouraged, because you actually give a declaration when you make submission to the journal that you have not submitted it anywhere else. So this should be discouraged. Duplicate publication is similar to redundant publication, only where the ideas more or less are same. You just change the title and then you get it published again, right? So duplicate publications also should be discouraged or avoided. Overlapping publication is publication where you actually take ideas and develop it. The ideas do not change, only the paper and the line of argument changes. Then they are overlapping publications. Overlapping publications should also be avoided. Last one is very significant. This is salami slicing. So ever heard of this term, salami slicing? What does it mean? Salami slicing? Yes?
No, I don't.
Okay. Salami slicing is actually when you take up a study and it is very large, right? And then what you do is you break it into pieces and you publish the separate pieces as separate papers. So you do a research, a study, and then you, on the basis of the findings of the same study, you actually break the information, you give information in parts, and you publish 10 papers on the basis of same study. So what you are actually doing is, again, a breach of publication ethics. It is salami slicing, something which should be discouraged and which is not good. If we really want to develop a sound research culture, then we have to refrain from salami slicing also. So we should be willing to put in more effort and come up with some, more meaningful addition to the existing bunch of knowledge. For this, number should not count, and therefore this should be discouraged. And this is where even the teachers and the supervisors at times fail to actually remind the students of this. So it's the same thesis, same ideas, 10 papers. So at times I have heard teachers themselves telling that you just take your thesis and publish independent chapters, right? So if you're doing this, then this is a breach of faith in the world of publication ethics, and this is something which you should not be indulging in, should not be actually practicing, and should not be slow in reminding your scholars also that no, this should be discouraged. The kind of papers which scholars publish, they are known as working papers, right? So the proper term for them is working paper. And what is the intention behind publishing working papers? Why is it that scholars are required to publish working papers? Why? Can anyone give me clue? So that the world of science may put up a critique. They're working on something very important, and counter arguments, counter perspectives, affirmations or negations should be welcome, because then what will happen, it may actually help the scholar redefine his course of action, or if he's going right, then it will actually be good that way also. So working papers are published by scholars, so because they're working on that idea and they invite critique of the academic fraternity on that idea. And then if people are critical about it, if people come up with some counter perspective to it, then they actually would be defending it in the argument as they develop it. So this is something which should be kept in mind, right? So this is all I had to say as far as this publication ethics thing is concerned. Now, to make sure that you are adhering to all the publication ethics, you have to keep in mind these points. As far as approval and consent part is concerned, whether you have taken copyright issues are there, so you should not be slow in taking permissions, right, from the committees or the boards or the people whose results are you are using. Then data should be accurately presented. There should not be fabrication of data. This is something which happens a lot of time. If you do not get results, you fabricate data so that you can at least, because of the pressure of deadlines, timelines, you fabricate data so that your thesis or your this thing gets published. So fabrication of data should not be there. Falsification of data, manipulation in any way should not be there. Accuracy should be there, right? Fake data should not be used, because ultimately you are contributing to the world of knowledge which is for the well-being of the society. So you cannot afford to go actually wrong in it. Then self-plagiarism should be discouraged. You should not copy your own ideas, right? Then submission fraud should not be there, submitting in two journals, either using salami slicing or duplicate publishing or and all. Then ethics of authorship means you have to, if there is a co-author, ghost author at times you have, no? You borrow ideas from guest author or ghost author. So if there are co-authors, then you have to properly give the credit to them all. And at times this happens, no? Superiors end up not acknowledging the contribution of their junior faculty colleagues. So this should be avoided. It's not actually going to contribute, because when we take up research, our job is to further the tradition of knowledge. So we are there for the higher things, and such things should be discouraged. Then conflict of interest, if it is there, then you have to spell it out. You have to declare the conflict of interest. You don't have to hide it, right? So these are the things we should keep in mind. Now the house is open for questions, right? So we talked about the need of academic writing, structuring the text and conveying the argument, editing and proofreading, summarizing and paraphrasing, avoiding plagiarism and publication ethics. So now the house is actually open for questions.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, good evening. My name is Dr. Pakita Pawan Mohanty. I'm calling from, I'm here in Bhubaneswar. My question regarding the paraphrasing, I have one doubt, during writing different kinds of research papers, and when we are doing any kind of, some kind of paraphrasing, is it possible to paraphrase the original citation of a particular author? Because when we are not paraphrasing it, during the plagiarism test, when we are doing the software run of the Turnitin, it is some red color signals are coming, because that means you have copied from others. So
Yes.
what is your approach and what is your suggestions regarding
It is
this?
necessary, sir. This is the reason why paraphrasing is heavily used in research papers, and this is the reason why we said what we promote is that you, instead of quoting a lot, you should paraphrase. And paraphrasing doesn't mean not acknowledging the original source. You will be using in-text citations. So you will be giving the credit to the authors, but you would be rewording it. And this helps a lot with the plagiarism tools and all. So it has become an essential practice these days. And it is good also. I tell you, number of quotations do not add any value.
But
Let
one
me
thing,
complete,
yes,
sir.
yes.
Let me complete,
Please,
and then you may actually look. Number of quotations do not add any value to the argument, right? The pieces of evidence, citations should be there, and the rewording is good because the flow of your text doesn't actually change when you are actually paraphrasing. So quoting should be discouraged and paraphrasing should be used that way also, because then you would be putting your ideas, your ways, and you would be using their ideas to supplement it and using in-text citations to give credit. Yes, sir. Now, what were you saying?
No, suppose for an example, ma'am, I just cited your work. Suppose, and I give the in-text citation of Dr. Bandana, and whatever your, quotation, whatever your formulas I put in one paper, and when some other people, write in that formulas, then he or she maybe, paraphrase it. That is also possible or not?
Look, you're talking about citations from citations, right? Citation, quote within quote you're talking about.
Yes, yes.
Right? So whenever quote within quote is there, what we recommend is that, one should be quoting the original source. The standard recommendation of MLA is this, that when you are actually using quote within quotes, then you should be using the original. It may deviate for APA. I actually, we are from English, so we prefer this MLA style sheet. So you have to read the style guide carefully. Every researcher should read the style guide, and the established notion of using quote within quote is that you have to cite the originals.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
If anyone else has any other questions, you can post it in the chat box or ask directly.
Dr. Vandana ma'am, no question from my side actually. You talked about so many things, and the entire presentation was structured and so full of energy, enthusiasm. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Actually, as teachers, it is essential, no? Whenever we teach presentation skills, we tell the students that weak delivery would not do. Right?
Right.
So it's really, I tell them that even if it is 7 in the evening, energy should not be, compromised with, because if it is not said with push, it will not be taken. I know that all what I have to talk about, you are from academic fraternity, we all are, but I would say that it is still meaningful. Every time I talk about it to you all, I am talking to myself also. I'm reminding myself that yes, all these, I'm committing to publication ethics. I'm actually showing me the ways. At times we miss on something, so it's important. We feel rejuvenated. Why do we do refresher courses and all? Because we feel rejuvenated, we feel re-energized, and we go with that new energy to the classes. So I thank you, sir, and I feel that every teacher, should deliver the things with push, because
yes,
only then it will be received that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sure.
Thanks a lot, ma'am.
That is the way it works actually. Yeah.
Yes. And I tell my students also, there is no Devya Gyan you can give to them. It's all known. Your work is to inspire. And as teachers, I believe this, that my job is to inspire. And if I can inspire my students, there is no limit to knowledge, right? So this inspiration part for this, again, commitment is required, right? And
yes, ma'am, yes.
we all are one here, because the fact that you are here doing this, it itself, and at this hour, right from the morning 9, you have been sitting here. It shows your commitment to it. So we are one in this, sir. I
Sure,
share
sure.
this with you all.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot, madam.
Thank you.
So nice of you.
Madam,
Yes, sir.
hello, madam.
Yes.
Madam, would you like to clarify that it may be free of cost to the teachers, those are doing research and working inside the schools, but never linked with the IIT, IM, like all these central government institutions where the Turnitin plagiarism software available, and
Sorry, sir.
able
No,
to
Turnitin is not available free of cost, sir. Academic institutions have to actually purchase it, right? As far as
Yes,
my
madam.
knowledge
Yes, yes, madam. I know that they are purchasing, but can you suggest that they may help to the researchers? Those are working inside the school, colleges where not such software available free of cost.
Sir, there are some softwares available. But I once heard this. I am not sure, I haven't done it myself, that there was a software, and when the scholar says that when she checked it on it, later on when she went about checking, it showed plagiarism and the ideas were the same. So
Yes, ma'am.
using
Yes,
free
that's
tools is dangerous.
save in the cloud. You're right. You should not use the online softwares.
Yeah. So this is something which I suggest that we should, yes, but we all can make the suggestion that Turnitin should be made available to all academic institutions.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
This is a valuable suggestion.
At least the big institutions where resides, the peripheral institution may be benefited by this. Like IIT peripheral, 25 kilometers, 30 kilometers, in these organization may be benefited by IIT.
Yes, so we can render this service, sir. For instance, our library offers this service. If they can come with a letter recommendation from a supervisor, then they can check the thesis. So
yes, madam.
Here I think our role becomes important.
Because myself also getting more problem because I am working inside schools.
Yes. In that case, what we can suggest, Dilip sir can request the authority of their school or college. They can purchase the software, so each faculty can use. That can be the.
Or if you can approach nearby university also, because majority of the universities are having the software and they can provide for this service. So that also can be done, right?
Some of the university professors or college professors also have their individual login, their own purchase. So through discussion with such people, I think we can have the solutions.
I think that I don't know how it will, but when HEI clusters come, maybe we would be in a position to share the infrastructure, software, and such facilities also. So maybe, sir, this problem is short-term problem. Soon we are becoming clusters and not individuals. Maybe then we would be having more resources. I'm only trying to be, optimistic. Because the idea is good, but how it will actually be implemented is what matters. If it is implemented in right way, only then it will be meaningful. Otherwise, it will become.
We have till now 3 policies, madam. This is the 4th, I think. So you are so optimistic. Let us be optimistic. Yeah.
That's what I said, sir. I'm trying to be optimistic because
yes, we need to be optimistic.
Yes. Policy is good. What will matter is how we implement it.
Right.
If we twist and turn it, then it will be meaningless.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Good day.
Yeah.
Madam, school teachers are facing lots of problem for the plagiarism checking.
I understand, sir. And this online platform is dangerous, so one should not go checking on online platforms also, right? So what I believe is that you should be writing to your authorities to approach the district administration. Maybe then it might work if you approach some university, because every university has this pressure on it. So when you go for NAAC accreditation and all, they do ask you what are your outreach programs, how you are contributing to the society, right? So if you approach, maybe the universities would be willing to help, because we are willing to help, because it counts for us. How we are contributing to the society, nearby people, it counts. And therefore, I think, they would be willing to offer such services. But some initiative would be required. And if you take that initiative, maybe others would be benefited. Or at least this can be done. You bring this to the notice of Education Commissioner of your area. And then, maybe he would initiate and it would be available to all the teachers that way. This can be done there, right? Centralized system is there, followed there also, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So this would be very noble contribution. If you do this, then it would be really helpful, because if it happens, the facility is open for the teachers, then of course it will actually be a valuable contribution that way.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Due to the paucity of time, we won't be able to take up any more questions. And I'm sorry, I really apologize for my inability to join your session in the beginning due to my class. I had a class from 2 to 3.
No problem, sir.
Yeah, I joined after 3. But it was really a very engaging session, very informative. And I can see all the participants are taking part in it actively. Really glad to see this.
Thank you.
You kept the participants engaged, because sometimes it's difficult to get any response.
No,
But
sir.
today I was surprised to see all the 3 sessions were very interactive. First session, I think, less because sir's lecture was there, but second and third, your session and Dr. Mishra's session, it was very interactive. Highly interactive sessions.
Sir, I believe this will work with teachers, no?
Yeah, it's really useful. So really,
Even
thank you
your
very much.
session on Sunday was also very interactive. You were
Sunday.
thoroughly engaged until after 6 also. Yeah.
Yeah, true, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for sparing your time and joining us, enlightening the.
And thank all the participants for lending their ears to me. Thank you, sir, for giving me your precious time and listening to me. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vandana, madam. Thank you,
sir.
Prabhaji.
It was really nice talking to you.
Now I invite Ms. Kashyapi Ghosh to propose formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Vandana ma'am, for such a interactive session, and it was very good. You walked us through the subtle nuances of academic writing. Also, the ice-breaking session was really, really innovative from your end. Also, thank you goes to the participants for actively engaging, of course, in a post-lunch session. We also thank our sponsors, AICTE Training and Learning Academy. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, once again. Okay, Pankaj, you can end the session now.